Right. Well, thank you, Richard, for that introduction, and thank you everyone for taking the time out of this incredibly busy period to come and hear us talk a little bit about the recent works at Castell Cinema, as well as the kind of interpretation of Swansea Castle in itself. So I thought it might be useful to get a wider understanding of Swansea Castle to give a little bit of the historical background of the area first, and then talk a little bit about the archaeological history and various interventions which have taken place in that area. We've kind of focused on a few archaeological interventions that relate directly to Swansea Castle rather than picking out every single intervention within the area. So without further ado, the first historical mention we have of Swansea Castle comes in the early 12th century, and that is when Henry de Beaumont, a Norman lord and Earl of Warwick, he commissions the construction of Swansea Castle in 1106 by royal charter, after he is granted the lordship of Gower. So interestingly, in 1105, he also commissions the nearby Lucca Castle. And Henry de Beaumont's kind of an interesting character. As you said, he's given the lordship of Gower after the murder of Hywel ap Gronwy, the last Welsh lord of Gower. And it seems like he's looking to create an administrative center for this region and solidify the Norman rule. So there's anecdotal evidence that possibly Henry de Beaumont took part in the initial campaign of William II into the UK. So the original construction of Swansea Castle, known as the Old Castle, was actually a Norman wooden motte and bailey. So this is first recorded in 1116 and is noted as being attacked by the Welsh in 1119, without really any details on who specifically the Welsh are, and kind of without much information on how successful this attack was. We do know that this attack was of sufficient strength to destroy the outer defences, but there's very little else that's noted. So the second phase of construction of Swansea Castle takes place somewhere around 1221 and 1284, and this involves masonry defences replacing the timber palisades of the original motte and bailey. So the first map evidence we have in this area, as you can see on the right of this screen, this is a recreation of a map of 1720. And you can see the motte of the Norman castle is clearly noted in the top right. And we can also see some other features such as waste from saw pits and the hospital in the south. So what we see as Swansea Castle now, the upstanding remains, is actually referred to as the New Castle. And these are formed somewhere around the region of the 13th and 14th century. And they start off as kind of a residential range, like a block of apartments, which later develops into an area that's structurally independent from the original motte and bailey castle. So when I was doing the research for this, I was telling one of my friends about it being originally apartments. And they kind of expressed a certain amount of disappointment in that the castle would be used as what they saw as something quite mundane. But for me, I saw it slightly different in that one of the things I love about archaeology is that human connection, and the fact that, even back in the 13th and 14th century, these sort of spaces were just being turned into blocks of apartments. I think that's actually kind of wonderful. That's just me, but it's very recognizable then, I think. So at its largest, Swansea Castle kind of occupied the space from College Street in the north down to Castle Lane in the south, which, if you're familiar with Swansea, is kind of where the mini roundabout is to the north of Wine Street and along the southern extent of Castle Gardens. Then it went as far as Princess Way in the west and obviously the Strand in the east. We have quite a lovely map overlay here to really illustrate the space that took up. On the left of the map, you can see that brown line which travels south. That is the approximate position of the walled town defences. And what this map really does very well is also illustrate the original course of the River Towy, which, as you can see, the castle grounds really has this wonderful commanding view over the Towy and this vital route into South Wales. So this is some aerial imagery of the modern town centre, and you have the blue pin which indicates where Swansea Castle is and Castell Cinema itself. So if you consider the grounds of the castle kind of encompass the green area to the north, as well as the castle gardens to the east, and then the shopping centre, which is like Slater's and the coffee shops and everything to the northwest. And it's quite interesting that it's actually the boundary of the castle is still fairly clearly visible in the modern setup of the city. And here we can see the map overlay there, and you can see the outer bailey stretches where I've just indicated and the Towie there. So yeah, it's quite lovely. There you go. So following this time, the castle is added to by Henry Somerset, who was the landowner at the time. However, after his death in 1549, there isn't really much done to it, and by 1583, the castle is recorded as being in decay. Not much happens after that, or at least we don't have any documentary evidence for it. However, in 1686, there's a clear attempt to kind of utilize this space that's just going to waste, and a glassworks is constructed within the ruins of the castle. And then during the late 18th century, the northern block, which is immediately adjacent to Castell Cinema on its southern side, and you can see that on the bottom picture on the left there, that is converted into a debtor's prison. And then during the 18th century, Swansea kind of goes through a fundamental kind of change as the copper works is opened in Landor in 720. During this time, the castle and the surrounding area is owned by the Duke of Beaufort. And it seems like he kind of sees this as a purely financial investment because he rents out the land around Swansea Castle for under a 99-year lease, excluding the land under the ancient clock tower walls and the battlements of Swansea Castle. And this exclusion is vital because it preserves the upstanding remains that we see today, and it prevents their demolition from the years of redevelopment that have gone on in that area. So we have the Duke of Beaufort to thank for that. So obviously any discussion of Swansea during the 18th century can't go without a mention of the copper works. And this kind of change really alters the landscape around Swansea Castle as the River Towy becomes a vital route for the movement of resources, particularly of bringing coal from the valleys down to the copper works. And we can see from map evidence that the area around the castle shifts in its function and actually starts to be utilized a bit more. It becomes much more of an area for workshops, for financial buildings such as markets, and even the county hall is built to the north of Castell Cinema and the castle. And during this time, the north curtain wall of the new castle is partially demolished for the construction of that market in 1774. So here we have the local Board of Health map of 1852. So I'm not particularly a map guy, but I absolutely adore this map. If anyone is doing any archaeological work around Swansea city centre and is looking for more information around the post-Med era, then this map is incredible. It was commissioned to track the health and hygiene of the occupants of Swansea, and it is just incredibly detailed and really very precise. And it's just been immeasurably useful to me on many jobs. So as you can see here, the old market can be seen within the castle grounds, and it's kind of northern extent, if we consider the right-hand side of the page to be the north. That kind of intersects where the modern Castell Cinema now is. You can also see the debtors' prison noted in to the south of the old market, as well as the workshop to the southwest of the debtors' prison, and the county court offices in the northeast. So we can really get an idea of the shift in redevelopment that's taken place. We can also see that by this time, the River Tower has been diverted, and now the Strand is a main street, and that space that the River Tower once took up has been redeveloped. But as we mentioned before, the exemption put in by the Duke of Beaufort has preserved those original castle features. So the next real fundamental change around Swansea Castle takes place in World War II, particularly during the Three Nights Blitz of February 1941. And this is just incredibly devastating for the centre of Swansea. Surprisingly, the castle is left relatively undamaged, but the surrounding area is practically leveled, and real known landmarks such as the Ben Evans building and what is now known as Castle Square are completely destroyed. And in the next frame, we kind of get a real indication of the scale of devastation that took place. Obviously, by the time this image was taken, the rubble and everything is cleared, but you can really see it's just flattened. And under that red circle, that is where Castell Cinema, the new castle, and the curved white building that you see going up towards High Street is what's now Castle Arcade and Castle Apartments. This building was also very badly damaged, and really only the frontage remained largely untouched. So now we get to a bit about the archaeological background of this region. As I said before, we kind of looked at a number of archaeological interventions that were relevant to this rather than taking up everyone's time going through every single one. So the first formal archaeological work we see in this area is carried out in 1913 by Colonel Morgan. And it took a significant amount of practice for me not to say Captain Morgan every time that I read out that name. But this takes place around Worcester Place and Castle Bailey Street, which, if again you're familiar with the layout of modern Swansea, is roughly where the mini roundabout is to the north of High Street, and then around kind of the bottom of Castle Gardens. So what this excavation identifies is a series of ditches which Colonel Morgan interpreted as belonging to the earlier motte, as well as a tower base associated with the later stone castle. So interestingly, 1913 is also around the time that Castell Cinema is constructed. But one thing with his interpretation of these ditches is that it doesn't quite match up to where we see the original Motte and Bailey, where the map evidence shows and where we will see later archaeological evidence shows. So this is the area where the excavations took place. And as you can see, the original Motte and Bailey is kind of noted further to the north, roughly to the right of where Worcester Place is noted. And we can see that here. So what, almost said it again, Colonel Morgan probably found, rather than the original motte, it was likely part of the outer bailey of the new castle, which he found, which really kind of tracks with finding the tower base as well. So the more information we have about the Outer Bailey ditch comes from two separate investigations which took place in 1975 and 2008. And these really focused on this Outer Bailey ditch, which took place near the David Evans store. So these confirmed the alignment of the defensive ditch, as well as many of the dimensions. And it had quite a substantial depth of 3.7 meters to the base below the modern ground level. And the basal deposits found quite a lot of 13th and 14th century material, including ceramic and some animal bone. But what overlay this was a really significant deposit of 17th and 18th century dumping, really illustrating the kind of backfill of these ditches and the changes that are going on in this area, and the sort of changing pressures on what this land is going to be used for. And on this slide, we can see where those excavations took place on the number 2 there. So the next relevant archaeological work comes in 1976 during a watch-in brief conducted during the demolition of the Evening Post buildings, which we can see in these lovely images here. And they reveal evidence of 18th century copper smelting and glass making, which, completely aligns with what we've talked about the changing use of the land during the post-med period around there, and the construction of the glass factory in that zone. So below the Evening Post building lay an undisturbed medieval courtyard surface containing quite a decent amount of 13th and 14th century ceramic, along with some slag and some food waste. And this was only 0.4 meters below the modern ground level, so it's, the overlying material is actually fairly shallow. And if you look at number 3 on this slide, you can see where those excavations, where the watch and brief took place. So the next structural discoveries we have come during trial excavations in Worcester Place in 1988 and some subsequent work which took place in 1994. Now, they confirmed a number of medieval features, potentially some floors and walls. They appeared to be at a fairly uniform depth of roughly 2.5 meters below the modern ground level. So showing the significant amount of kind of post-med material that was put over this. And interestingly, what they also found, roughly a meter below ground level, was a deposit that they interpreted as the leveled top of the earlier earthwork castle, which, when you see the next slide of where these excavations took place, it really fits much better with the location of the original Motte and Bailey, rather than what Colonel Morgan seemed to interpret. So the south curtain wall of the old cinema was later found directly beneath the north wall of Castell Cinema. So number 4 here is where those trial excavations took place. And you can really see that, that's really where the Motte and Bailey is noted. And then 5 is where the later excavations took place. So now on to the bit that really everyone came here to see, which is what we found in the most recent works and how that ties in with what I've just been rambling on about. So in the red square, the red rectangle, you can see roughly where Castell Cinema lies. So from my perspective, coming in as a member of the advisory department, this was a really wonderful site to work on. It's some really complex archaeology set within the confines of a listed building, which really made some of the factors quite tricky because there was a real limitation on the alterations that could be made to structural elements of the new build in order to protect the archaeology, because obviously they still had to support the listed building itself, so they couldn't just be moved willy-nilly. What I think this site really shows was what could be achieved with really close work and synergy between the advisory department of ourselves, the projects department, Swansea planning department, and Easy Living, the developers involved here. Developers can often, rightly or wrongly, see archaeological works as a barrier to development and a hindrance, but Easy Living were actually really great and really open to shifting a lot of the the structural elements in order to protect the archaeology. And they were just very accommodating, which meant that we managed to get all of the work uncovered, all of the structural elements uncovered, recorded, protected, and without any significant delays to the development. So we all kind of walked away happy, and it was generally a win-win situation. So now I will hand over to Isaac, who, along with Shelley and Alice, did the real practical work, and as you'll see, did a wonderful job in cleaning and recording this material. So over to you, Isaac.
Thank you, Mike. I'm just gonna figure out how to share this correctly. I think I've done it right. Great. So, hi, I'm Isaac. I'm a project archaeologist for the Trust for Welsh Archaeology, and I was fortunate enough to be on this job for pretty much the full duration of it, minus a few stints somewhere else and also on holiday. But I was fortunate enough to be a part of the team in actually uncovering this part of Swansea Castle, which was incredible. So as Mike sort of already touched upon, this cinema was a Grade 2 listed building, and because of the potential of coming across post-medieval and medieval remains, um, well, potentially beneath the cinema, it was decided that it should become an archaeological watching brief. And basically, what this entails is whenever there's any sort of groundbreaking material on a job, an archaeologist has to be there to watch. And if anything comes across, stop the works and record the archaeology, and then the works can continue. And this job led to the rediscovery of the long lost castle wall and something else, which you'll see in the next slide. There were also some other structural elements which were post-medieval, to do with the market, as Mike was talking about, and other buildings around the area, including an inn and I'm not sure what else, but I've got maps later on, so we'll be able to look at that too. So I'm just going to go straight into. Ooh, there we go. I'm going to go straight into an exciting photo. So this is just a actual full extent of Swansea of the castle that we found, and you can see that we found a decent chunk of it. It was remarkable, to be honest. The moment we hit it, I was quite surprised and shocked that such a big chunk of it had survived. In addition to that, if I just get a laser pointer up quickly, to the east, you can see a wall running north to south, and this was a post-medieval wall, which actually does truncate a big section of the medieval castle on the south side, which is interesting because Mike was talking about redevelopment, and obviously they've got rid of a lot of it, but not all of it. So this is just a nice top-down view of the steps that were exposed during the excavation. We were able to clear 7 of the steps and go down to a safe working height. Originally, there was meant to be a footing that was going to sit on top of the medieval wall here and extend over to here, and it was going to go 3 meters deep. But then obviously, once we had hit the medieval wall, we said, no, this has got to be replanned because this is a significant find. So it was replanned and moved around quite a lot. So these are two photos showing the relationship of the medieval wall with the post-medieval wall to the east. On the left, you can see there's quite some really nice surviving structural elements to this wall. So you can see this beam slot here, and then a cornerstone right up against it. This beam slot measured approximately 1.8 meters deep, so it was quite substantial, and that indicates it was for something structural, most likely some sort of defensive mechanism. And then you've also got these other small little holes here that could be to do with a latch to go onto something. And my interpretation of this is that it could be a drawbar for a gate, which would have increased the defensive capabilities of the castle and prevent people coming in from the riverside. The photo on the right shows just how heavily truncated that part of the medieval wall has been, how heavily truncated it has been by the post-medieval wall. You can also see sort of the state of the post-medieval wall. It's very loose stone. I imagine it's because when they were building this wall, they came across the medieval wall behind and they thought, oh, this is pretty sturdy stuff, so we can just sort of stack it and lean against it. It's amazing. So it's sort of a reuse of the medieval structures. Really amazing. It's incredible. So I thought I'd just go into a bit more detail about castle drawbars and their purpose and how they would help secure a castle from invasions. So a drawbar would usually be made out of either wood or iron, and there would be two slots on either side of the door. One would usually be deeper than the other, so then you could slide it in across the door and slot it in, and this would make it extremely difficult for attackers to basically get into the castle. These were really reliable, they were easy to fix, and they were used in plenty of castles. They were also used in churches, and the examples I'm just about to shows those examples from churches of the drawbar mechanism. They're some nice 3D models. I won't spend too much time on them, but they're just a nice example to show the similarities with what we found and what else is out there. Here we go. I'll see whether it, there we go. So you can see the cornerstones on it. You can see the drawbar slots on either side. It's quite a similar structure to what we came across, which sort of made me lean towards that interpretation. Here's another example. Another doorway, nice arched way with those beam slots for the drawbar. And I've got a nice close-up shot to show the similarities of what we found with those cornerstones. I'll go on to the next one now. This one is actually at a base of a stairway, so it's maybe a bit more comparable to what we found with a metal gate. And when you let it twizzle round, I think when it comes round again, you can see in the corner some drawbar slots again. So just in this corner there. And then this is just an example of a drawbar slot mechanism with a wooden door. Just some examples, sort of get an idea of what it could have looked like. So now on to another interesting structural element of this medieval wall. So on the north of south face running wall, there were two holes. There was one on the interior and one on the exterior. And this made me sort of think about, well, what could the purpose be of this? And there are a couple possibilities. So it could have been a putlog hole, which is a small temporary hole made during construction to support the wooden scaffolding beams. And although these were typically filled in when the castle was finished, they actually often remain visible in the ruins because of it degrading over time. The other interpretation is they could potentially be it could potentially be a weep hole, and these were designed to have small openings going from inside the castle to the exterior, and it was designed to allow water to drain and prevent hydrostatic pressure build up within the walls and also the build up of water within the castle grounds. So this run of the castle wall is probably the longest section we got, actually. It's the north-south running section of the wall. And as you can see from this scale, this is a 1 meter scale. It's actually wider than that. It measured a maximum width of 1.2 meters. So it's a hefty wall. It's a big sturdy wall. And also, as you can see, the center of the wall is all rubble core. It's bound by mortar. And then on the right hand side photo, you can see it's got those really nice facing stones. So yeah, the construction's incredible and the scale of it as well. So when they got to excavating the footings, and once they had actually been replanned and removed, they dug one right by the medieval wall at the northern end. And this is just a really nice photo showing basically when they were building the Castle Cinema, they just completely truncated this medieval wall. You've got the concrete footings there, and it's just cut straight down through the medieval wall, and it's also been undermined there by the construction of the Castle Cinema. So these are just some really nice profile shots of the stairway and the returning walls that are related to them. On the left, you can see the returning wall, you can see the steps, and you can see this slight little gap here. And that indicates potentially different construction phases, which sort of gives us a greater understanding of the story of Swansea Castle and how it was built. So I think likely how it was constructed is you have the external wall, the north-south running external wall was constructed first, and then you had the stairway and then the returning walls as well. These are just slightly zoomed out shots just to show the state of the exterior bit of the returning walls. As you can see, all that remains is the actual rubble core of this side of the wall, but it gives us a better idea of how it was constructed, how it was put together. It's just a nice visualization of that. Also, the north-south running wall, you have a tiny little section of it here, but then it's been really heavily truncated by this post-medieval wall here. These are just a couple more really nice shots of that cornerstone we have and the beam slot as well. And it just shows how close they went to this medieval wall, but also that they've clipped this corner of it here and they truncated the back of it here. And also here you can see just how loose this stone is. So it was just a boundary wall, as you'll see in later maps, but yeah, they've literally just lent it up against it. And interestingly, when it was being excavated in this area, it was all backfilled with stone. So I imagine what they did is they backfilled it all with stone and then they just realized, oh, we can just lean it against and that'll be fine. Wouldn't pass building regulations today. So these are just some close-up shots of the steps, and it's showing the construction and different phases of the construction. So it sort of gave a better understanding to what was built first and which order. So as I was saying earlier, most likely it was those external walls that are built first. But then interestingly, because we've got some steps missing here, it's quite easy to interpret that it looks as though these steps were built first, and then the wall was built directly on top of the steps. So it just gives a really nice interpretation as to the different construction phases of Swansea Castle. You can also see in some of the other photos that the construction of the steps are, you've got larger stones beneath, they're sort of irregular stones, and you've got these nice flat stones on top, and it's all bound by mortar. So I've got a nice photo here from the mid-19th century. It's actually a bit more south to where we were. It's closer to where the new castle stands today. But it gives a nice example as to the kind of steps maybe we could have had and what it could have looked like. So you have your stairway, you have your lovely archway, there's some gates. Yeah, it's just a really nice example showing a stairway that would have given access from within the castle down to where the river once stood. One other thing I only noticed this week is that there's a man there. There's a man there on his ladder refueling the lamp, and I did not see it until the other day. So now I'm gonna talk about sort of the drawing aspect of it and how that can like help with our interpretation. And it sort of expresses the interpretation that we've got from the site, but it shows it in greater detail. So this is a plan of all pretty much, well, the most important part, the castle bit that we found. And it shows the structures, relationships to the surrounding structures, and also can show this. I mean, you can see here, you can see what I was talking about. You can see those seams. So these were likely built later. And then you can see these are the footings of the Castle Cinema truncating. And this is the post-medieval wall, which is running northeast, southwest, and it's cutting the southern end of the medieval castle. This is just a nice profile of the steps and the associated wall as well. So it's the steps here, and then the wall continues and it links up there. I did try to put them together, but it didn't look very neat, so I've just left it. But it links up there, and that's the seam you have on the exterior wall again. So it's showing that different construction phase. What I also really like is that you can see how irregular the steps were. So it's just quite a nice little diagram of sort of like the variations in the structure. So I'm just going to quickly go through what we found in terms of post-medieval structures. So you can see in the background there is the post-medieval wall, which runs just east of the medieval structure. And then we had a few other structures as well, which I'm just going to talk about now. So the photo to the left is looking to the southwest, and it's showing again the length of that post-medieval wall, which actually ran the whole width of the Castle Cinema. Originally, when we found it, we thought, oh no, castle walls, but it turned out it wasn't. It's a post-medieval structure, but then we came across the castle walls. So it was, it was really just such an amazing dig to be a part of, to be honest. On the photo to the right, you can see a brick wall, and then it's got a stone facade. So it looks as though they've used that stone facade to sort of tie in with the rest of the buildings around to make it look original and blend in. So these are just a couple shots looking down a couple of the walls that we came across. To the left, you're looking to the south, which is looking towards the Newcastle now. That's the post-medieval boundary wall. And then to the right, you've got that brick wall, which goes east, and it abuts that post-medieval wall. And then let's go on to the next one. So this post-medieval wall was actually pretty substantial, and it sort of makes sense as to why they didn't try and clear it all out and they just built on top of it. So it did, in some places, reach a depth of around 2 meters. So it was really hefty. And unlike the wall, this same wall to the north, this part of the construction is really nice. You have these really nice squared stones. It just is a lot more solid than it is further north, which is really interesting. It shows how they sort of integrated and incorporated that medieval structure to the build of that wall. So this just shows sort of, again, I suppose the incorporation, but also the destruction that took place during the construction of the cinema. So on the left, you can see that the post-medieval wall that I've just been showing you has been completely cut through and truncated at its southern end. And then on the right, you can see in certain areas of it, they've actually just built directly on top of the stone wall of previous post-medieval structures. And there's mapping which sort of will show this, and you'll see amazingly how in line and how much they respect the former boundaries of the previous buildings. So this is just a close-up of the red brick wall and that stone facade on the front. On the right photo, you can see just how closely it gets to that other post-medieval wall, and it butts up right next to it. But there is that slight gap, so it suggests it could be a later construction. Not entirely sure. Not entirely sure. So because they had to dig more footings in this area, we had to investigate and see the extent of this brick structure. It was dug. It was quite strange, really. We thought potentially it could be an alleyway or maybe like an external shed or storage unit. It doesn't show up on the map, so the significance of it I don't think was that great. The cinema itself didn't have any basements, so it would have been prior to the construction of that. So it would have been probably associated with the previous post-medieval buildings. So to the west of this brick structure, we found some really nice, this was Shelley actually. Shelley found some really nice cobbled flooring, and this could very well be associated with the former market or a side street that potentially led to the market. It's not quite clear. It was quite hard to sort of line up all we had with the maps and the maps that were available. Lastly, the last structure that I found was this tiny little segment of stone wall. When looking at the maps, which you will see in a minute, it looks like it lines up perfectly with the exterior wall of the old market. So yeah, we've got a tiny bit of the surviving part of the old market as well. So onto the maps and back to the Board of Health map as well, because as Mike said, it's a brilliant, brilliant map. So the amount of detail it gives is incredible. So basically, I just wanted to show the map, and then I have an overlay of the modern Castle Cinema as it is now. And as you can see, it lines up pretty much perfectly within those two parcels of land there. And it then goes through half of where the old market stood. But that completely explains why in certain areas of the Castle Cinema, I could actually see within the foundations the old brick walls from these past boundary walls. Yeah, it's amazing. They're just, yeah, respecting the former boundaries, sticking to the plan is remarkable. So the earliest covered market in Swansea actually dated back to 1652, and that's what you just saw on the maps there, and it was demolished in the 19th century. But yeah, it used to stand right in the shadow of the new castle, which is the last bit of the castle standing today. So these are just some really lovely models that are based off the Board of Health map. You can find these models in Swansea Museum, and it's just amazing because it sort of brings to life what it would have looked like and what buildings were surrounding the castle prior to the construction of the cinema. The most crucial part of this is that the market was actually directly connected to the quays and the quays by the river, and they were historically known. The passageway was historically known as the Castle Steps, which is awesome. And I think from the interpretation and the research we've done, I'm pretty sure it's the same Castle Steps that we've found the last remaining surviving section of. These steps were sometimes described as a covered way, and they provided a steep, essential shortcut for moving goods and people between the elevated market ground and also prior the castle down to the waterfront. And this sort of underscores and underlines the town's reliance on maritime trade. Basically, it's recorded that when the market was destroyed, the castle steps were completely removed and destroyed. So people thought that was it, they were gone forever. But we still have that tiny bit remaining, which is, well, just incredible. And we're very fortunate. Here are some other maps. This is just showing basically the cinema, and then you've got the new castle directly to the south. And then I've done a nice overlay of the model, and it shows again those boundary lines. They line up almost perfectly with the construction of Castle Cinema, which is quite interesting. So upon original research, we thought the steps that we had found were these, oh, wait, I'll just use my little pointer here, were these tiny steps here. And we thought, yes, we found it. We found the steps. But then upon further investigation and looking into it a bit more, we looked at it and we thought, this has got a curve, and it's got a curve similar to the post-medieval wall we found. So then I lined up that map, and it looks like it almost perfectly lines up with that post-medieval wall. And then you have the medieval wall directly behind it, which then lines up with the continuation of the medieval wall to the north of Castle Cinema. But in this map, it's already been partially destroyed and then covered up as well. Again, onto the Board of Health map. And I've just put the overlay of our survey onto the Board of Health map, and you can see the curve of that post-med wall, boundary wall. You can see how nicely it lines up with those previous boundaries there. So in terms of preservation, it took a while to come upon agreement as to what to do, but eventually we decided we would put 2 layers of orange ceramic on it, and then we would use polystyrene boards to give that buffer between the concrete and the wall when the concrete expands, just to further protect the walls and prevent them from getting covered in concrete or disrupted even further. It's just a nice little overview as to what the ongoing renovations will hopefully look like at the end. I think it's just really nice that this building has been saved. They're repurposing it. They're actually building it for affordable living as well. So it's helping those who need it. And it almost ties in with what Mike was saying when the new castle to the south was used as flats. So we've got that relationship and link again. And that's me done. Diolch.
Oh, that's brilliant. Diolch yn fawr, Isaac and Mike. That's such a fascinating presentation. And I think I'm going to wrap this up quite quickly, actually, because we were scheduled to be finished by 8 o'clock, and we're going to run over otherwise. And it is obviously available on YouTube after this, but And I think one of the things, just an observation from me, apart from the fact that I loved Mike saying that he's not a map guy, but he absolutely loved this map, and I think we need to get the Board of Health map framed and put up in our office, Isaac, in St. Fagans. I think that needs to go up on the wall.
Excellent.
but really, really brilliant presentation, and it sort of is a real expose of all of the different facets of Heneb, in a way, all of the different types of work that we do, from the planning archaeological advice that we're giving through to the work that you've done, Isaac, in being in that space and excavating, and it's really interesting in that regard. There are lots of people applauding, and there's lots of people saying thank you for the presentation. I'm just going to refer to one question which Clifton posted into the chat. And first of all, I'm really pleased that Clifton, the sound managed to get sorted out for you, because I know the settings weren't quite working originally. But the question was about whether or not you referred to Mott, and I think Clifton's question is that he thought that the only Mott was on the other side of the look at Pontardawe as being the only Mott in the lordship of Gower, and that all of the others were ringworks. I don't know if you, Mike, I don't know if you can answer that one, or is it one for us to take away?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. I think the kind of, and it is potentially the case, I think the difficulty we have is that a lot of the evidence we have for it being a modern bailey is quite dated now. Like a lot of the references are very old. I mean, we have that notation on the reconstruction of the 1720 map. And we have that possible kind of leveled bank material in the 1998, I believe, investigation. But kind of without further archaeological intervention in that area, I think it's quite hard to say for certain whether it is indeed a Motte and Bailey or whether it's a ringwork.
Okay, great. We'll leave it there for now then. And as I said, this is going to be up on the Heneb YouTube channel, so you can watch it back. And I think we'll probably try and share it as widely as we can, especially with local contacts in the Swansea area. And really good to hear that Easy Living have been so helpful and accommodating as well. Dwi eisiau deud diolch yn fawr i Sian Evans am y trefniadau heno. I want to say thank you to Sian for the organisation this evening. Diolch unwaith eto I pawb am eich cymni heno. Thank you to everyone for joining us again. And the only last thing to do is to say Nadolig llawen a blwyddyn newydd dda. And we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.